Hello, what's up, guys? Hope everybody's doing good. I just thought I would jump on here and do a little impromptu, some bonus content for you guys. Obviously, you can tell I'm not at home. I'm out in Chicago doing some stand-up shows with Robbie the Fire Bernstein. It's been a lot of fun. I love Chicago. The Zanies in Chicago and Rosemont are two of my favorite clubs in the world. So I've been having a lot of fun out here. And there are, if you guys want to come out, there's the early show tonight is sold out, but I believe there's still some tickets left for the late show. So come on out if you're in the area. Okay, so I thought I would jump on here and respond a little bit to Douglas Murray's. He just wrote an op-ed for the New York Post in which he discussed our debate from last week. He was also just on Bill Maher's show and talked a little bit about it. So anyway, I thought I'd read the op-ed and we could go through it because it's just so ridiculous. And it's I think truly revealing. There's an interesting dynamic that's going on here because there's so much, there's so many lies and like intentional bullshit that Douglas is spewing. But the thing that I find most interesting about it is that Douglas is falling into a problem that is really a microcosm of a larger problem that the corporate media is had, as we've kind of watched the corporate media apparatus collapse before our very eyes. And it's something that I've talked a bit about on the show. There's this dynamic where the audience of the podcast world is so much larger than the audience in the corporate media that it's becoming impossible for them to frame the issue the way they want to, when they're lying, when they're being dishonest about it. So one of the examples that I used that I thought it was really fascinating during the campaign was my buddy Tony Hinchcliffe, if you guys remember. He spoke at Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden, and he did he did what Tony does. He did like roast comedy, and he roasted everybody. And what happens is it was streamed on YouTube. It's clipped up on Twitter. I mean, I don't even know how you would go about measuring how many people saw that, but it was in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. It just, the numbers were huge. It was the viral sensation of that week. And then the corporate media attempts to say that this was a speaker at a Trump rally, not a comedian doing shock jock humor. A speaker just got up there and said all these things about Puerto Ricans. By the way, it was interesting that they picked Puerto Ricans. He roasted everybody, but they picked Puerto Ricans because I think they're like a big voting demographic in Pennsylvania. It was like so cynical and obvious. But the major problem that they had with this lie was that everybody had already seen it. MSNBC is broadcasting to 150,000 people, maybe, and 100 million people have watched the video on Twitter. So not only did way more people see the actual thing and they know what it is, so you can't lie to them about that, but most of your own audience has seen it on Twitter. So I don't know, I just felt like there's a similar dynamic here where it's like, dude, you could go on Bill Maher's show and claim that, just lie through your teeth and say that, what happened was people on Joe Rogan's show were talking about how Hitler's not that bad. A bullshit lie that me and Joe called you out on the show, and you had nothing to back it up. You didn't have an example that you could cite. Anyway, we'll get into some of this in the article. But it's just like, dude, this doesn't work anymore. You can't go to the New York Post and claim that what happened was different than what actually happened, because more people have already seen it, including most of the people reading this New York Post article. And in fact, in the comments section, he's just getting skewered. But okay, so let's go through this piece by Douglas Murray. It is, if you guys want to go read it for yourself, the title is Douglas Murray, so-called Ukraine-Hamas-Ukraine war, quote, experts spew false info on Joe Rogan's podcast. There has to be a standard. Bit of a long title, but there you go. Okay, reading from the article. Last week, I seemed to break the internet. I went back on the Joe Rogan podcast to talk about my new book, which is available at all bookstores since you asked. I've been on Joe's podcast a number of times before, and I've always enjoyed it. Joe is a master of his art. A lot of people think they can talk casually, but interestingly for hours. Sorry, New York Post makes it difficult to read. That's mainly because Joe makes it look so easy. But this time I went on with a question. Having not spoken to Joe since the wars in Ukraine and Israel started, I had become increasingly irked that the guests he's had on have been almost entirely anti-Ukraine and anti-Israel. Many of the latter in particular are not just vindictively and maliciously anti-Israel, but have been spewing claims that are demonstrably false. All right. Many are also people who are simply in no way expert at what they are talking about. All right. Attacks on Israel. One of these is a comedian who goes by the name of Dave Smith. Claiming some Jewish ancestry, he has spent the 18 months since October 7th, 2023, being very unfunny indeed. Sorry, it's hard to not read this in his condescending voice. Specifically, he has decided to spend his time going around the podcast world sounding off about Israel. Okay, so right away, it's just, I mean, what can you even say about that? His claim is that, look, sorry, this New York Post link is, I don't know why the New York Post is such an annoying website to read. So, by the way, it's so funny that in the midst of Douglas Murray's, appeal to expertise and his, argument that people are just asking questions and they're kind of hiding behind this, right? You're not just asking questions. You're doing more than you're saying something. What the hell is this? Claiming some Jewish ancestry? Would Douglas Murray describe any Jewish person who was pro the war in Gaza? Would he describe any of them as claiming some Jewish ancestry? Doesn't that kind of feel like just asking questions? I mean, he claims Jewish ancestry. It's like, yeah, that's what being Jewish is. I mean, separating the religion from, the people or whatever, but yes, I claim some Jewish ancestry. My mom and my dad, that's the ancestry. But again, it's like, you just know for a fact he would never say this about anyone else. But this is supposed to be like a little dig on me or something. Okay, you're right. I'm faking it. I'm faking my being Jewish for all the benefits that come with that or something. All right. And yes, he says, I've talked about these things. What's kind of interesting is that literally the day before he wrote this piece, or the day of he wrote this piece, he went on Bill Maher's show. Did he start by calling out Bill Maher for being a comedian who's not an expert, who talks about these issues? No, he didn't. Oh, it's almost as if that was never really the issue. It's almost like you're completely full of shit, and really your issue is just that people are being critical of Israel. That's the issue that you have, not that they don't have the correct level of expertise. Okay. And in terms of saying I've been very unfunny, I don't know. I talk about serious topics, much like Bill Maher, and you don't have a problem with it. You don't have a problem with Bill Maher talking about serious topics. You don't have a problem with Dave Rubin talking about serious topics. You don't have a problem with Konstantin Kassin, who wrote a garbage piece just like this one the other day. All these guys are comedians who talk about serious things. Come to one of my comedy shows if you want to see me be funny, or listen to my comedy podcast. I don't know. This is all just stupid. If people are spewing such disinformation or getting everything wrong, so point something out. Take on one of the arguments. But of course, much like in the actual debate, that's the one thing you don't want to do. All right. In the process, he largely cites people like him, people who have many views but no obvious expertise. That's just a flat out lie. Just a flat out lie. I cite experts constantly. People like Daryl Cooper, who say he isn't a historian, yet has been invited onto some of the world's biggest podcasts as a historian. One of Cooper's many ahistorical claims is that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. Of course, back to the same boring thing that we already dealt with in the debate. On these and many other occasions, Cooper has simply lied about history. Well, again, I mean, there's only so many times that we can go over this same goddamn topic. It's like all he has is that Daryl Cooper made a hyperbolic statement once, but that's not a lie about history. You might have a different interpretation, fair enough. Daryl's argument is essentially that Churchill was largely responsible for World War II not just being a war in Poland, but turning into this horrible world war. Now, that's debatable, and you could say you think he gets that wrong, but that's not lying about history. That's having a different opinion than you. All right, back to the article. When invited to debate the world's foremost living expert on Churchill last year, he declined, saying that he didn't know enough to go up against it. Yeah, that's, again, just a lie. It's not what he said. Yet still, Cooper gets invited on show after show to throw out falsehoods that he can't even back up. It's so funny because, so name them. So go through them. Point out something he got wrong. I mean, like I've still there's, as we've said many times, there's like two different groups with Daryl Cooper. There's the people who have listened to his work, and there's the people who have an opinion on it. But like, if you wanted to take on Daryl Cooper, so Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem is an unbelievable series about the early history of the creation of the state of Israel. Point out what he got wrong. Point out something that like a fact that he got wrong in there. Again, you can't do that. So you just have to harp on this one thing. Okay. Yet still Cooper gets invited. I read that. And on which his online interviewers seem happy not to challenge him. Another such figure from the world of comedy who is changing his shape to fit the time is Rogan guest Ian Carroll. Like, how can you not be embarrassed to write that? No, Ian Carroll's not a comedian. You don't have the first clue what the fuck you're talking about, Douglas Murray. And on the show, he thought Daryl Cooper was a comedian. He didn't even know his name. He got his name wrong on it. So while you're making this appeal to expertise, you don't know the first thing that you're talking about. What are you talking about? Another figure from the world of comedy who is changing his shape to fit the time is Rogan guest Ian Carroll. This is just, you can't make this up. Okay. This is someone who, when he last went on Rogan's podcast, very carefully tried to minimize the evil of Adolf Hitler. No, he didn't. You're a liar. That didn't happen. Outrageously and completely falsely, Carroll claimed that in the 1930s, Hitler had kept his anti-Semitism down, a provably false claim that Rogan did nothing to counter. I'm almost positive he's talking about Daryl Cooper here, not Ian Carroll. And what Daryl Cooper has said was that in the early 30s, knowing that it wouldn't be well received, Adolf Hitler kind of toned down the anti-Semitism and then really brought it back out. Like he's not claiming he wasn't an anti-Semitism. He's claiming he toned it down in the early 30s. By the way, this is, again, I'm not the expert on this. I know I'm not allowed to admit that, but I will admit when I'm not the expert on something, unlike Douglas Murray, who also talks about a lot of things he's not an expert on. But he's talking about Daryl Cooper, not Ian Carroll. He's getting it wrong. Ian Carroll's not a comedian. He's getting that wrong. And the other thing is that this is very mainstream history. There's several mainstream historians who will make the exact same argument. There's not even anything particularly controversial about it. And this is in no way to make the, and you see anyone with a brain here, you see what Douglas Murray is doing. So if you're talking about the fact, again, something that mainstream historians, some of the most notable Hitler historians have also said, that in the early 30s, he was toning down the anti-Semitism because he didn't think that would be too well received amongst the German groups that he had to win political support from. So if you make that argument, that is in no way downplaying the atrocities that Hitler committed. It's just not, but he's trying to make you think that that's what they're doing because he's dishonest. That's all he's got. Okay, all of these men have also been palling around online with Holocaust denier and proud anti-Semites like Jake Shields. Okay, so it's Rogan's guilty for who he has on his podcast, then he's also guilty for who he has on his podcast who may have podcasted with other people. It's all just ridiculous. Okay. 2 weeks ago, Rogan had his mate Dave Smith on yet again for a long podcast. But for my return to the show, the deal was that I could come on only if Dave Smith was once again in the studio, as if Joe didn't want to be unaccompanied, or that Joe thought it was I, of all his guests, who must be challenged. Okay, so listen, this is just like the most pathetic bitch behavior after a debate that went really bad for you. Like, look, I don't know exactly what Joe's conversations with Douglas were before the show, but more or less, I mean, I don't think I'm giving away anything I'm not supposed to say. Yeah, Douglas wanted to come back on the show. And Joe was like, he wanted to come on to promote his book. And Joe was like, hey, how would you feel about doing a debate with Dave Smith? And he accepted. It's like, hey, if you don't want to accept it, don't accept it. But to accept it and then go back, like bitching about how this was an unfair condition. I don't know. I've done a lot of debates. I've never once in my life done this. You either accept the debate and then you go do it, or you don't accept it, which you had every right to do. The reason things are going so bad for you is because you tried to do both. You tried to accept it, but not debate me. And that didn't work out very well. Now, as far as, Douglas saying that, like, okay, it's a fair point that, like, yeah, I was on the week before but Joe wanted someone there to challenge Douglas. He wanted to have the debate on his show and not just give him a platform to, spew his propaganda. Okay. Now I could understand from Douglas's point of view, kind of feeling like, he would prefer not to do it that way. He would have preferred to just come on and just promote his book. But, at the same time, look, two things on this. Okay. Number one, if I was ever in the situation where Joe, like, I wanted to come back on and talk about something, and he was like, well, I want there to be someone giving you pushback there, I'd go, okay. I mean, sure. I'm taking pretty controversial views, so maybe there should be. When he asked me if I wanted to come debate Douglas Murray, I mean, I said yes before Joe finished asking the question. Because, like, absolutely, let's do it. And if your whole thing here is that you're saying there's all these lies, there's all this misinformation being spewed by guests like me, a non-expert, and you're the expert, so why wouldn't you be thrilled at the chance to come smack it down, right? Like, on the show. Right? Like, what? It seems like if this is what you're arguing, then you should have been happy that this was the setup. And then, the other thing I would say is that it just makes a lot of sense. It's fairly obvious. Again, I don't think I'm giving away anything like behind the scenes here. It's like, look, Douglas, you're supporting a policy that is resulting in thousands of children dying, probably in the tens of thousands of children dying already, let alone how many more people die as a result of all of this. Because, when you destroy an entire area like Gaza, even if people have to be moved out or whatever, I mean, there's more people are going to die as a result of this over the next few years. So, yeah, the onus is on you. That's a little bit like, you could understand where when someone like me is not advocating a policy that's going to result in children dying, and you are advocating a policy that will result in children dying, even if you're going to argue that this policy is still necessary, you could understand where someone would be a little more uneasy about having you go unchallenged. So for example, here's an issue that me and Douglas probably both agree on. I support mass deportations. Okay. It's an issue that I've grappled with over the years, but at this point, I do think it's like, I think people who entered our country illegally do not have a right to be here. And I think it's completely reasonable for us to say, yeah, listen, you came here illegally, you committed a crime, you don't have a right to be here, you've got to go. Now, that being said, I also understand that is a policy that comes with, a human cost. There are, first of all, if you're doing mass deportations, it's almost impossible that you're never going to make a mistake and that you'll never get, the wrong person. We can see that already mass deportations aren't happening, and it seems like some mistakes have been made. And then also there's, even when people are here illegally, there's examples that are kind of heartbreaking. I mean, there's people who are just good people who have families, who have established a life here. Someone who came into this country illegally and has been here for a decade and maybe, has kids or whatever the situation is. There's a real human cost to deport people like that. And even though I support the policy, if I wanted to come and argue for that policy and someone was like, I'm a little uneasy with this because of the human cost associated with it, so I want someone there to give you pushback, I'd completely understand that. I would understand that the onus is on me if I'm advocating for a policy that's going to result in human suffering to some degree. And that's nothing compared to the human suffering going on in Gaza right now. So anyway, it's like, I don't know. The onus is on you. You're advocating for this policy, so defend it. Which again, he wanted to do everything except that. Okay. So, okay. I like a debate as much as the next Scotsman. No, I don't think you actually do, Douglas. But what resulted was more than a debate. It seems to have led to some kind of podcast world meltdown. Again, isn't this just the beautiful tactic that the corporate media always uses? It led to a meltdown. Looks like I triggered the trolls on this one, right? It's like, AKA, people think you embarrassed yourself. But it led to a meltdown, meaning that it's pretty unanimous in the comment section that you lost. And you were also just terribly pompous and insulting while you did it. While avoiding the debate, while making no points, while not taking on any of my points, you embarrassed yourself. That's the meltdown. Okay. You always see, it's all framing. It's like the only people who seem to think Douglas Murray won the debate are, like I said, people with Israeli flags and Hebrew letters in their Twitter name, and or people who already hated my guts or who are already all in on his side, for the most part, at least. And, it's always, if I do a podcast talking about, this is what they were saying for weeks, is that since I posted a couple things on Twitter and then I did a podcast breaking down to the debate, they're like, see, Dave obviously lost the debate. Otherwise, why would he need to do damage control? Do you think any of those people will now go, shit, Douglas Murray wrote an op-ed about it, I guess he's doing damage control? No, they won't, because they never really meant that point. It was just something to grab onto. Much like Douglas Murray's whole expert argument. He doesn't really mean it. Otherwise, he'd be critical of Bill Maher, too. Otherwise, he'd be critical of all these comedians who are, talk about serious stuff. Okay. Sorry, hold on. God damn it, is so annoying to read something on the New York Post's site on your phone. Sorry, I should have thought about this before. Okay. Sorry, just scrolling through what I already read here. All right. Sorry. Okay. Yes, so it seems to have triggered a meltdown. Okay. It's always a meltdown when the other side does it, but I guess this isn't a meltdown. Whatever. Okay, the first reason was that from the outset, I challenged Joe on his choice of guests and why he had been giving a platform to only one side of a debate, and a very conspiratorial one at that. Yeah, conspiratorial. Okay. He and Smith were immediately defensive, but the real problem came when I raised the issue of expertise. I don't think me and Joe were defensive. I think what you were saying was completely ridiculous, and we were both just pointing that out. That's from my perspective what happened. But again, it's not. So when Douglas says that these people coming on Joe's show are very conspiratorial, yeah, maybe that's true, but also maybe it's appropriate. Here, let's read a little bit more and then I'll make this point. Because as I said then, and I've often said, we have lived through a period where the quote experts have gotten an awful lot of things wrong. From the COVID lab leak to the Hunter Biden laptop, we have lived through years after which distrust of experts has become inevitable. Okay, so here's, I think, an important kind of distinction here. And I really do think in a lot of ways this separates the Douglas Murray side from my side of this. And that's not to claim that again, as I said on the show, that's not to claim that every conspiracy is correct or that there shouldn't be standards. I think people do get a little bit sloppy at times with with presenting certain conspiracies as if we know this for a fact, when really in reality it's more kind of like, oh, there's some interesting questions here, and sometimes even conspiracies where they're kind of starting with their conclusion. And when you do that, it can be, you'll have little pieces of evidence that you're presenting as if they're major pieces of evidence that are actually not, so that happens. I like to think that I'm not too guilty of that. Maybe I have been a time or two. Nothing comes to mind, but maybe I'm wrong. But then you have on the other side here, you have Douglas saying, the way he puts it is that the experts have gotten some things wrong. They got the lab leak wrong. They got the Hunter Biden laptop wrong. Here's the thing. No, they fucking didn't. No, they didn't. They did not get either of those wrong. They lied. And there's a big difference between those two. They didn't get it wrong. You can see this. We have at least some of Fauci's private emails. And you can see they didn't get it wrong. They just knew they had created the thing. And so they lied so that they wouldn't be implicated. And they didn't get the Hunter Biden laptop wrong. The FBI had it already. They knew for certain that this was Hunter Biden's laptop. There was no confusion over whether this was a Russian disinformation campaign. They lied. Look, what Douglas Murray is trying to, and what he's doing, and he knows what he's doing. He's defending the regime in like a limited hangout type fashion. So what he does, for people who don't know, what a limited hangout is like essentially, and it's an old like CIA, like tactic. But so when you get caught in a major, lie or a major scandal, what you do is you give out some of the information while protecting the most important part, right? Because you can't deny all of it because you're too caught. So you admit the experts got some things wrong. But that's not really the story here. Look, just in the last few years, okay? And I doubt anyone listening to this or Douglas Murray himself could actually argue with this. I mean, Douglas Murray can't argue with much, but we've lived through in the last few years. Okay. The current president of the United States of America was framed for treason by his own intelligence agencies. They knew it was bullshit, and they framed him for being a Russian spy anyway. And they kept it going all through the midterm elections of 2018. It was every single day, Trump, Russia, collusion, people coming on the expert media shows, having experts come on and claim that Donald Trump had been a Russian spy since the 1980s. All just complete lies, complete bullshit. That's a real thing that happened. Then, as you're kind of acknowledging here, when they got it wrong about the lab leak, our own government funded the creation of COVID and then lied through their teeth about it, and then had the New York Times run articles about how you're a racist if you believe in the lab leak theory. But as we know now, it was a subsidiary of the NIH that funded the Wuhan lab where this gain-of-function research was going on, which, by the way, now it is accepted even by the intelligence agencies as the overwhelmingly likely origin of the virus. Okay. Also, there was a giant pedophile ring that involved the highest levels of our government, including the intelligence agencies, which insisted that he get a sweetheart deal the first time he was caught. This is the files that have been released on this giant pedophile ring are still redacted for national security purposes. Okay? So no, it's not that the experts have gotten some stuff wrong. It's that they are part of an apparatus that is intentionally lying to the American people to cover up some very real conspiracies. So now in that environment, if you want to come in and spend all of your time attacking the people online who ask questions about other conspiracies, it seems like you're kind of doing this in service of the regime. And so anyway, this is nonsense that the experts got a few things wrong, but we still need expertise. Like, oh, okay, sure. Okay. So from the COVID lab leak to the Hunter Biden laptop through the years, distrust of experts has become inevitable. Well, that's for sure. Yet that doesn't mean that expertise does not exist. And so here you have Douglas Murray, as he's constantly doing. Look, the entire first 45 minutes of the debate on Rogan's podcast was Douglas oscillating between two different logical fallacies. So he was kind of making an appeal to authority. I'd say he's either making an appeal to authority or he's just attacking a straw man. Choose your logical fallacy, which one you think. Because if you're saying something like, that doesn't mean that expertise doesn't exist, who the hell is arguing with that? If what Douglas Murray was saying was, you can only talk about these things if you're an expert, which he certainly implied, but then kept insisting he wasn't really saying that. Well, that's an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy. If Douglas Murray is just saying it's important to know what you're talking about, well, then you're just batting down a straw man. Nobody is arguing it's not important to know what you're talking about. By the way, and this is part of the reason why Douglas had such a poor performance and why he's getting so much shit for this, why everyone's having a meltdown about Douglas Murray's, performance, is that if he's making the second point, that could be stated in one short sentence, like I just did. Hey, if you're going to talk about these things, it's important to know what you're talking about. Boom, done. It doesn't take 45 minutes to make that point, does it? Because he knows he could make that point and we'd all go, okay, yeah, we agree. Now let's get into the debate. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to draw this out as long as possible. And it certainly, at the very least, was not clear that that was all he was saying. He was saying, the answer is to have more experts around. It's like, okay, but what exactly do you mean by that? Well, he never defined it. He never, was clear. And by the way, there's a whole lot of experts who would take my position on that debate. And he doesn't want to have those guys on either. I can promise you that. Because once again, like with Bill Maher, it's not really about expertise. It's about Joe platforming people who are critical of Israel. That's his issue. Okay. It does not mean that a comedian can simply hold himself out as a Middle East expert and should be listened to as if he has any body of work. Again, another blatant straw man. I'm not holding myself out as an expert, but as we both conceded, I'm allowed to talk about these things, right? Okay. So if you have so much expertise and I don't, I saw someone on Twitter said it. I thought this was a very good way to put it, but he just said, expertise can't be stated. It has to be demonstrated. I thought that was very well said. Sorry, I can't remember who said that on Twitter. I'd give you credit for it. But that's the whole point. It's just the whole thing over and over again. What you'll notice, nowhere in this op-ed is Douglas Murray taking on anything I said, pointing to one thing that I got factually wrong. Pointing to one that his best attempt was the thing where he was like, oh, you've never been to the checkpoints, so you don't know. But then he made the claim that no goods are being turned away. Go back and watch the show. That was his claim about Israel's blockade on Gaza, that no goods are being turned away. By the way, he says this the same week that Israel's foreign minister said not one grain of wheat will get into Gaza. And he's arguing nothing's been turned away. So again, he's not taking on anything, just like on the actual podcast. It's ridiculous. Okay. It does not mean that someone who says they are not a historian, but who practices false history should be cited as a historian. This point seemed to rile both Smith and Rogan. Yeah, you made a really, really stupid point. You're there, so take on someone's argument. I don't know. It appears to have riled their audiences even more, AKA I lost the debate. Yeah, it seems like these debates, the purpose of these debates typically is to try to move the audience. And so when you don't, now I'm not saying that if the audience says, if the audience could think someone lost a debate, then you could still think they won it. I'm not saying that. I've watched debates before where I was very surprised with the audience reaction. Like I thought one person won it, but the audience seemed to think the other one did. But the purpose of a debate is to move the people in the audience, to try to present your arguments in the most sound and compelling way and get people to see oh, this guy's got really good points. So when you're just sitting here saying, again, it's all the framing, this riled up the audience. It's like, yeah, the audience was damn near unanimous in thinking that you clowned yourself. Okay. Because many people seem to think that what I meant is that they're not allowed to have an opinion. That is wrong. I think they are. It's just that there should be a price to pay for spreading bullshit. And part of that price should be called out. Oh, I'm sorry. And part of that price is that you should be called out. It's like, yeah, but Douglas, you were there to do that and you failed. So like, okay, fine. So call us out. But also this goes two ways. What you're talking about, the audience being riled up, this is people calling you out. It's what it is. And you know, if you're going to say that there's many people seem to think that what I was saying was this, well, isn't part of that on you? Isn't your whole thing that you're like a wordsmith and you're like this eloquent, rhetorician? Like, isn't that your strength? So if we spend 45 minutes on this and me and Joe are still both going, Douglas, what are you saying? What is the argument here? And it's still unclear to this much of the audience. Maybe that's on you. Because if all you were saying was, it's important to know what you're talking about, and if you get stuff wrong, you should be called out. You could have said that in one sentence, and I promise both me and Joe would have agreed. And then we could have moved on to get into the debate right away. But you didn't want to do that. Okay. Have you been there? If I had gone on Rogan's podcast and held myself out as an expert in MMA fighting, I suspect he would have noticed. If I had kept making mistake after mistake and showing ignorance piled upon ignorance, I think he'd say, hey, you don't seem to be very knowledgeable about this. And he'd be right. So why is it hard to grasp that something similar applies in other areas? Douglas, nobody doesn't grasp your point. We all grasp it. Like, it's unbelievable how pompous this guy is. He's making the simplest point. It's a non-argument, but it's fine if you just want to make this point. Everybody grasps it. Nobody doesn't. And it's funny that you use this example. Again, you have to hide behind this idea of if I had gone on Rogan's podcast and held myself out as an expert. But that's not what anybody's doing. And actually, it's interesting you bring up the MMA example, because I've spent a fair amount of time on Rogan's podcast talking about MMA. And like, again, look, the John Anik, who's he's the UFC like lead commentator. He's the what do they call it again? Not the color commentator. That's more Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier and some of those other guys. But he's like the lead broadcaster. Now, he's never fought. He's never fought in MMA, but he studies it and he makes some really great points about it. And there'll even be, and I'm friends with several like legit MMA experts, including Joe. But I'm friends with like a few like former fighters and current fighters and stuff. And like, look, the bottom line is that either your point is correct or it's not. This is where you get into the appeal to authority fallacy. Like, if I'm not an expert on MMA, but I'm a big fan. I watch it a lot. And I'll make points sometimes and Joe will be like, yeah, that's a great point. And then there's been other times where I make points and he'll be like, well, I think you're getting that wrong. In fact, just the other day he did this. We were at the, I was talking about when Diego Lopez fought Brian Ortega. And I said at one point, he hit him with like a 2-punch combination. And I said, I was like, he woke him up with the second one. Like he was out and then he woke him back up with the other punch. And Joe goes, nah, that's not real. Because I don't believe in that at all. There's no way, like, trauma to the head doesn't make you gain consciousness back. And then as he said it, I was like, yeah, okay, I think he's right about that. But if I were to say, like, okay, when Diego Lopez fought he fought Alexander Volkanovski the other day, and I go, Volk's jab was a huge factor in that fight. That's either true or it's not. It's either correct or it's incorrect. Now, I'm not an MMA fighter. I'm not an expert, but either I'm correct or I'm not correct. And so, in other words, take on the fucking argument. Make a point. You're sitting here saying mistake after mistake was made. What is it? The whole goddamn podcast, we had 3 hours there. You're writing a piece about this. And nowhere in the piece do you feel obligated to point out this stuff. Demonstrate it. Don't just state it. Demonstrate your expertise. But again, the issue is he doesn't actually have any. Okay. Okay. In bigger rings and more important fights, saying that this applies in other areas and more important fights. Having spent most of the last 18 months in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine, I don't think I know everything. but I think I know a damn sight more than someone like Comic Smith, who admitted he'd never even been to the region he spends all his time talking about. Again, this is the same non-point is all he brings to this op-ed. Oh, so you have to go to a country to comment on it, do you? Said part of the internet. Again, the answer is obviously not. But if it is your job, or you're making it your job, then probably yes. If I filed columns for this paper pretending to be an expert on countries I'd never been to, I would expect my readers to complain, as they should. So I guess John Anik has to get into the octagon and fight in order for this to be his job, commentating on the UFC. By the way, again, Douglas Murray is a hypocrite on this issue because, as I understand, he's never been to North Korea. He's never been to Iran. He's never been to lots of countries that he talks about. Now, he may argue, well, I tried to go there and I can't, but that's beside the point. You still talk about them, even though you haven't gone there. And in fact, you still advocate for wars, even though you haven't gone there. And, again, he can say, oh, I couldn't get into those countries or something like that. But that's, yeah, because you're critics of those regimes, much like I am of Israel. So yeah, it's a different proposal to go to those countries, isn't it now, Douglas? Israel's going to protect you at all costs. Not so sure they'd do the same for me. So whatever. But also, it's just, so by this same line of logic, explain this to me. And by the way, I've heard, before I get into that, I've heard several people make this point now in response, because this debate has gone so incredibly viral. But people will say that, even like people who have been to the region many times, they'll make the point that actually, there's a lot that you can learn by going to the region, but also it can be misleading sometimes. Like if you're going to the region the way Douglas Murray's going to the region, and you're taking like the IDF propaganda tours or something like that, it's not exactly clear that that gives you as well-rounded a view as you might actually get from a few thousand miles away, just looking at both sides of it and informing yourself through experts. But more than that, why is it so what Douglas is very clearly saying here, no one's having trouble grasping it. You're saying, hey, you don't have to go to the region to talk about it, but if you're going to spend your life doing it, like if you're going to professionally talk about it, then you should go to the region. Okay. How about spending your entire professional life advocating for every goddamn war and serving in none? What about that? Like Douglas is around my age. So, okay, we're a little old to be serving in war, but you know what? I'm still an able-bodied man, and I would just, like, to me, I'd feel uncomfortable advocating for every single war while serving in none of them. And then actually demonizing people who did serve in the wars if they don't have the correct opinion. The one that you've decided is the one you're allowed to have, which is, also supporting more wars. But how about that? Why doesn't that come up? So you can't professionally, or you shouldn't professionally talk about a place if you've never been there, but you can professionally advocate for wars and never serve in any of them. And you can professionally advocate for wars, each one being a disaster, and still continue advocating for the wars without serving in any of them. Douglas Murray advocated for the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Syria, the war in Ukraine. Every one of them an unmitigated disaster. But it doesn't cost him anything. I mean, the only thing it seems to cost him is that he humiliated himself on the Joe Rogan Experience. But aside from that, not much. He's gotten rich advocating for wars that he's unwilling to fight in. And yet he's going to call me out for being against the wars without visiting the area, even though he's allowed to be for wars in areas that he hasn't visited. Yeah, Douglas, no one's not grasping your point. The problem is that it's garbage. It's a horrible, horrible point. That's the issue. Okay. If I filled columns about a war zone from the safety of West Palm Beach, I think it would be fraud. Journalism has had its own meltdown in recent years, but it doesn't mean that we don't have standards. Okay. We could go over the standards of journalism. You got to be fucking kidding me. It's just such a, this is what I mean about, like, the limited hangout and the defending of the regime. Does journalism really have standards? I mean, every goddamn one of these wars we've just been lied into, and the journalist class has played a major role in that. Again, with Tony Hinchcliffe, where were the standards there when they tried to pretend that Tony Hinchcliffe was a speaker at a Trump rally? Where were the standards in any of this shit? Okay. Much though that might amaze some people, it doesn't amaze people that you assert that journalism still has standards. We think you're lying. Okay. What the standards are in the new media, especially on podcasts, is still being worked out, but there must be some. Otherwise, the new media will lead people into errors and evils far greater than the old media could ever dream of. So that's what you got to be concerned about. The new media, not the corporate media that has led us into all of this disaster. The real problem is that now there's free speech on the internet. Now the media is decentralized and other people can call out their bullshit. But you see, that's the real danger. Now, what can you say about this? He frames it as the internet had a meltdown. No, you accepted a debate on the biggest show in the world, and you showed up and you did terrible. And you were also just like a pompous ass the entire time. You made no arguments. You countered none of the stuff that I threw at you. And even in this piece, you're writing an op-ed now about it. And I guess what's just shocking to me, and look, I mean, I'm just a comedian here, right? I put myself out as an expert, but I'm really just a comedian, right? But I don't have the standards of Douglas Murray. But if you notice in this video response, what I'm doing is I'm taking on his fucking arguments. And I would argue tearing them to shreds. It is crazy to me that you could have a debate, have this reaction against your debate performance, and then write an op-ed on that debate where you're essentially attacking me personally, down to he claims Jewish heritage, whatever. So you're attacking me, and you don't, talking about these journalistic standards, you don't feel an onus to take on one thing I said. Think about that. As you're talking about expertise, as you're talking about standards, you don't have the most basic standard that just comes from being a decent person and feeling like, well, look, I'm obligated to take on some of the stuff he said here. If I'm going to smear this guy in a piece for the New York Post, I should take on one argument that he made. I should, instead of just stating that I'm an expert or stating that he didn't go to the region, I should probably demonstrate my expertise over his, demonstrate the insight that I've gained from going to the region. No, just doesn't even attempt to. Same with Konstantin Kasin wrote a garbage piece about this too. Doesn't take on one argument, doesn't take on anything. I don't know, man. This has been interesting to me. As I think I mentioned the other day on the show, I've gotten a lot of people have reached out to me, and both just a lot of regular random people, and then a lot of people in this world, like household names. I'm not going to say them because they reached out privately, but like names that you would all know, who very much disagree with me on the Israel issue, and were all basically big fans of Douglas Murray. And I think probably went in like, okay, great, we got Douglas Murray on the case. He's going to destroy Dave in this debate. And a whole bunch of them reached out to me and they were like, oh my God, I mean, he just did terrible. I can't believe he did such a terrible job. And it's not like when I debated Dennis Prager or Laura Loomer or like some of these other debates where like, it's not that I wrecked him in the debate. It's that he was unwilling to have the debate. He tried to show up and just not engage throughout the whole thing. It was every single excuse to do anything except debate me on the topics. And so anyway, so there's a bunch of people like on that side, even it's divided between and then there's the other people like obviously Douglas himself and Konstantin and like Dave Rubin and some other ones who are like trying to double down on this garbage point that Douglas Murray is making. And I just find that to be fascinating because on top of the fact that it's wrong and stupid, like outrageously stupid, the argument is just totally ridiculous. But on top of that, it's also just such a losing argument. Like, it's just like, read the room, dude. Nobody wants to be lectured about how the expert class is who we need to call in here. Nobody wants to be told that, like, you're getting a little too conspiratorial. They just got some things wrong. No, they didn't. And, you know, to all those guys who are doubling down on Douglas Murray's line here, first of all, you're exposing yourself because he's being intentionally dishonest. He went on Bill Maher's show and said, like, all these guys on Joe Rogan's show are downplaying Hitler's atrocities. That has objectively never happened. Nobody has gone on Joe Rogan's show and downplayed the Nazi atrocities. No one. And, you know, I would just say, you know, the people are not as dumb as you might think they are. And that is one of the things that really has, like, shined through in Douglas's whole line of argumentation here. It's that, like, there is this assumption that your audience is really fucking stupid. Like, if you have people who aren't experts on, I guess this is going to fool everybody. And, you know, it's all you got. You're insulting your own audience when you do this. So anyway, I figured, listen, full disclosure, I don't know, Douglas Murray just keeps handing me free content, you know, so, like, what can I do here? This is my weakness. I can't not just, you know, dismantle this trash. I don't know what to say. Anyway, also, you know, I've been traveling so much the last few weeks, as you know, the podcast schedule has been a little bit off. So I thought it was nice to jump on and give you guys some more stuff. Hope to see some of you guys out at the shows in Rosemont tonight. This is our last night here before I head back home. All right. See you guys next time. We'll be back on our regular schedule this week, I promise. All right. Take it easy, guys.